How you doing there? Welcome back to Babble on Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Vav, Daf 96 of Masechta Chullin. Friends, 96 is Gewaldig. We begin the first section of today's Daf. We wrap up the discussion from yesterday. Rav's Shita yesterday was that if you take your eye off of your meat, you're not allowed to eat it anymore. We're scared that a bird came and replaced your meat with other meat. However, we had said that if you have certain signs about your meat, that you can identify your meat by those simanim, by those signs, so then you can assume that you know that it's your meat. So we're going to we're discussing visually recognizing meat. What if you don't have any specific sign per se, but you recognize, you say, this is my meat. I know that this, I recognize it. This is my cut of meat that I had earlier. So we will discuss that sugya, and that will wrap up that Mishnah, bringing us to a new Mishnah where we will discuss defining the Gid Hanasheh. I would say that's kind of the, I wouldn't quite say the big sugya, but that's like the piece of work, I'd say, on today's daf, is defining the Gid Hanasheh. How big is it? How small is it? How much do you have to go after it and remove it? And so that there's going to be different shitas and but it's going to be a little bit of spaghetti, not a major spaghetti, but like there's just a few shitas and kind of figuring out where they overlap and where they're separate and what exactly are they and who says what. Anyways, that I think is going to be kind of the part of the daf that requires the most the most gentle touch, let's say. And then finally, also kind of along that way, we discussed the amount to eat from the Gid Hanasheh. It's all kind of related, right? Those last two sugyas are kind of related, defining how big the Gid Hanasheh is and how much of the Gid Hanasheh do you have to eat in order to be chayv for having eaten the Gid Hanasheh. Those two sugyas kind of develop together. And anyways, this is what we have to look forward to for Daf 96, Daf Vav Masechta Chullin. I think my voice is starting to go a little bit. I'm not too concerned yet, but I probably have to be drinking more tea. I saw I'm running out of tea. I'm going to have to pick up some more today. Anyways, friends, come join me. Let's have a great time learning Daf Vav Masechta Chullin. Friends, we begin Daf Hey Amid Beis, about 10 or so lines from the bottom. Rav Chia bar Oven, Rav Chia bar Oven, Itaved le karkosha b'vei donei. Rav Chia bar Oven, he lost a colon in the bowels of his wine cellar. Also, the Kam de Ravuna, and he came before Ravuna Amarle Islach Simona begave. So he lost some meat, essentially. Now, we had seen from yesterday that the Fishita Rab, if you lose sight of your meat, it becomes aser. So, but we did, however, see that if you have a siman, if you have some way to identify the meat, to know that it's the same meat that wasn't swapped out by a bird, well, then you can assume it's the same meat and it's kosher. It's fine, you can eat it. So Ravuna asks Rav Chia bar Oven, do you have a siman? Do you have an identifying sign? Amle lo, he says, nisht, I don't. Ich hab nisht a siman. I don't know if that makes sense, but I don't have a siman. Islach tfiyas einam begave, do you recognize it at least? Amle in, yeah, I recognize it. Yeah. That looks like the piece of meat that I had. Looks like the colon that I lost. So where am I? So Amale in, he says, yeah, I recognize it. Im kain zil shkol, he says, okay, nish gefährlich, you can, no big deal, you can eat that colon. Rav Chanina, I guess that's what he wanted to do with it. Rav Chanina choza isavid lei gava de bisra. Rav Chanina choza, he lost a back of meat. The back of meat. Okay. Also, the Kame, Rav Nachman, he came for Rav Nachman, Rav Nachman says, Islach Simona begave, do you have a sign to identify it by? Amar lo, he says, I don't have a sign. Islach Tvius Eina begave, do you at least recognize this back of meat? Yeah, I recognize it. That that certainly looks like the back of meat that I lost. That I lost. So Im Kain, if so, Zil Shkol, so Rav Nachman says, okay, Givaldi, you can have it. Rav Nosin bar Abaye, Isavidle Kibura de Trelta, he lost Tcheles threads. Tcheles threads to use for his Arba Kanfis, to use for tzitzis. Now, if you remember from Masechta Menachos, so there is something you have to be concerned about when it comes to tcheles, and that's something called a kela elon. Kela elon is a dye that looks similar to tcheles, or even looks identical to tcheles, and you have to make sure that you're using tcheles and not kela elon. So therefore, the question is, he lost, right? He says, he lost his tcheles, and then he found his tcheles. The question is, can you assume that this is the tcheles that he lost, or do you have to be concerned that maybe this isn't the tcheles that he lost? And you know what this might be? This might be kela elon, which is also in this big nafkaminas here, right? You're gonna tie these strings on your daled konfis, on your four corner garment, and you're gonna think that you're being yotzei the mitzvah of tzitzis. But if it actually got swapped out for kela elon, you're not yotzei the mitzvah of tzitzis. So the question is, can you rely upon this tcheles to say that this is the tcheles that you lost, and that's the tcheles that you found, the same thing? Or do we have to be concerned that it's kela ilan and you push it, you can't be putting it on your tzitzis? So also the comment of Chizde, so he comes before of Chizde Amalei, and he says to Rav Nosson bar Abaye, Isoch Simona begave, do you have some kind of identifying sign? Amalei lo. And Rav Nosson bar Abaye says, no, I don't have identifying sign. Isoch Tvius Ein begave, do you recognize it at least? Amalei Ein, he says, I recognize it. Yeah. Im Kain Zil Shkol. So Rav Chizde says, okay, fine, you can take it, you can assume that it's tcheles, and you can tie it onto your arba kanfis. I'm going to drink a shluck of coffee. On my Rovit, says Rovit, Meresh initially, I would say, Simona Odav mitvius Eino, Madrina Navedosa, Simona Vlo Madrina mitvius Eino. Says Rava, initially my thinking was that if you can give a simon for something, if you can give an identifying sign, an identifying marker for something, that is a better proof of identification than visually recognizing it. Initially, that was my thinking, that a simon, being able to point to a sign on something, an identifying mark, an identifying sign on something, initially I thought that was a better identifier than simply saying, yeah, I recognize it. Because after all, when it comes to a lost object, if you remember from Masechta Bava Metzia, Elu Metzias, if you lost something and now you want to say it's mine and you want to get it back, so you have to give a sign, you have to give an identifying mark. You can't just say, yeah, I recognize it. Yeah, that's my object. I know, yeah, it's mine. I recognize it. It's mine. If you're a Talmud Chacham, you can. But for regular people, no. You'd have to give an identifying mark. So it says Rava, initially I figured that a simon, an identifying marker, is a better identifier than just saying, yeah, I recognize it. Because we return lost objects when you give a sign, a simon, unless you're, with the exception of a Talmud Chacham, for regular people, you can't just say, yeah, I recognize it, it's mine. However, however, now that I've learned about these cases that we just heard, person loses tcheles, and we're saying, just by saying that I recognize it, without giving any kind of a simon, just by saying I recognize it, we're going to allow you to put it in your daled konfis, you'll be yotzei the mitzvah of tzitzis with it, and we're not concerned you're walking around with arba konfis without tzitzis. Or we're going to allow you to eat colon based on the fact that you recognize it. Or that back of meat, where we're going to allow you to eat isav eter. We're going to allow you to eat meat, and we're not going to say it's treif. We're going to allow you to eat meat. We're going to allow you to walk around with tzitzis, with this tcheles, based on the fact that you recognize it, even without a simon. So that changed my mind. Amina tvius eina adifa. I changed my mind and say, you know what? Simply recognizing something visually is better than even a siman. Di lo temach, and I'll prove it to you. Heachsuma mutter beishto. What about a blind person, or a person who can't see? So why is he allowed to be with his wife? He can't see her. He can't identify her. Right? There's no kind of a siman, to say, I recognize her by her hair or whatever. But he recognizes her by her voice. Or even people who have eyesight, but in pitch dark, how are they allowed to be with their wives? Ella betvius eina dekala. Rather, the fact that they recognize the voice, even though they can't identify an identifying marker, a visual marker, but they identify the voice. So Achanamis here also in these cases of the meat, of the treles, betvius eina, it's enough to say, yeah, I recognize it. You don't have to give any specific detailed markers. And we're saying that, right, so a blind person could be with his wife. Right, and based on saying, yeah, I recognize her voice, even without any specific simanim. So therefore Rava says that, in the end it seems that actually recognition is more significant than having specific simanim. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak says, Rabbi Yitzchak, pray, teda, you should know the following. Dilu asu beitrei ve'amre planya dehai simane koto nafsha lo katlinan le ve'ilu amre islan tvius eina begave katlinan le. Right? If you have two witnesses come to court and say, we witnessed a murder, and the court says, who did it? And they say, well, we didn't really see what he looks like, but we can't recognize him, but he had a red beard and red hair. A red beard and red hair and long red hair. That's the one who did it. We're not gonna get some guy with a red beard and long red hair and kill him because he's the murderer. But if they came and say, yeah, we saw the guy, that's him, we'll kill him based on the testimony. So we see that visually recognizing something, even if you don't have a specific, right, visually recognizing somebody is more effective, is powerful than just giving simanim about that person. Ravashi says, Ravashi, Teida de ilu Omerle inish l'shluche. If a person said to a messenger, Karye leflanya dehai simane v'hai simane safek yada safek lo yada. If a person sends a messenger and says, look, I want you to find so and so and bring him to me, he has a red beard and long red hair. So the messenger sees somebody with a red beard and long red hair. He doesn't know. Is it him? Is it not him? I don't know. Vilu islay tfius eina begave. But if he would recognize the actual person, when he sees the person, say, oh yeah, I know that person, even without this sign, that sign, even though, right, the messenger, the sender didn't say, here's this person, he's got, he's this sign and that sign. He just said, here's the person. And the messenger says, yeah, I know who this person is, even without specific signs. Meaning, when you can recognize something visually, so then that would be enough of an indicator, even though nobody gave you any specific signs about that person. Okay, fine. So says Rava, in the end, being able to just kind of like generally say, yeah, I recognize it, even though there aren't any specific signs that you're giving for it, that other than when it comes to Hashavas Aveda for non-Talmidei Chachamim, but otherwise in general, if a person could say, yeah, I recognize this person or this item, that would be effective and even more effective than providing identifying markers for that sign without actually recognizing the totality of it. And now we get to a new Mishnah. We're going to learn this Mishnah in all of its Gemara, which is not that much. And the main ideas that we're going to be discussing here are A, defining the Gid Hanasheh. How big is it? How much is it? And B, eating, how much of the Gid Hanasheh do you have to eat in order to be chayiv? He says the Mishnah, Hanotel Gid Hanasheh tzarich sheyitol es kulo. Says the Mishnah that if you're removing the Gid Hanasheh, you have to remove it in its entirety. Rabbi Yehuda Omer kidei lekayim bo mitzvahs netila. Rabbi Yehuda says that you don't have to remove the Gid Hanasheh in its entirety, just to be mekayim the mitzvah of removing it. What does that mean? So this takes us back to Gemara and Daf Tzadi Beis Amud Beis. We had said on Daf Tzadi Beis Amud Beis. No, where are you on Daf Tzadi Beis Amud Beis? That Gid Hanasheh mechatet achrav. On Daf Tzadi Beis Amud Beis, we said that Gid Hanasheh, you have to mamish be mechatet achrav. You have to get rid of. You have to take out all of it. B'chol malkum shu, wherever it is. V'chol techshanu meikaro, and also it's fat. Divra of Mer. Rabbi Yehuda Omer gomamo mashofi. Rabbi Yehuda just said gomamo mashofi. The question is, what exactly does that mean? Give me a second. Okay. Let's take a look at this slide. Just before I pull up this slide, it's a little graphic. So just if anybody is sensitive to that, maybe close your eyes or something. But yeah, I pulled this up from the All Daf YouTube. The YouTube is really, really helpful there. Sometimes, yeah. Anyways, the YouTube is really, really helpful, and this was like the best images I could find from the Gid Hanasheh anywhere. So I just kind of pulled up this YouTube video. Anyways, okay. So here's the photo. What's going on? Okay. Here is the photo. So if you look at the right, if you look at the white arrow, there's our friendly shochek. If you look at the white arrow, so that white arrow is pointing to the Gid Hanasheh that we're talking about. Now, Now, what are we even looking at in this photo? So, where the blue arrow is pointing to, I think that's essentially kind of where the bone was. I think they kind of opened up the cow's leg for us. And I think that where that white arrow is, I think where the bone fit into, I think. So the point is, I think that the Gid Hanasheh kind of starts up there, and like if you can, I think you can kind of like take the bone and like fold it back into where the blue arrow is pointed to, like that white area, and where the gold arrow is pointing to above that. So that's the top of the bone. It's pointing to the top of the bone. So basically, I think that bone basically fit into that white area where the blue arrow is pointing to, and there's like some gidim, like tendons at the top there, where the blue arrow is pointing to. Anyway, the Gid Hanasheh, I think, goes over the top of the bone where the gold arrow is pointing to. And then where the white arrow is pointing to, it goes down the leg. Okay, it goes down the leg. And then where the red arrow is pointing to, it goes back into the meat. Okay? So basically the Gid Hanasheh goes from the spine over the top of the thigh bone, down the leg of the thigh bone, and then back into the meat, right? There's basically a few different layers of meat around the leg, right? The kaf hayarich is that layer of meat that's directly around the leg, but there are other layers of meat on the leg. So now the Gid Hanasheh goes along the kaf hayarich, along the meat that surrounds that thigh bone. And then where the red arrow is pointed to, it goes back into the meat. So what we're saying here, according to the sheet of Reb Meir, let's start with Rabbi Yehuda. According to Rabbi Yehuda, you only need to remove what the white arrow is pointing to. The part that is not inside the meat. What the white arrow is pointing to, the part that's not inside the meat, you have to gomo ala shofi? Gomo ima shofi? Gomo ima shofi. You just need to remove that part that goes along the kaf hayarich, over and along the kaf hayarich. Reb Meir though says you have to, right? What's it called? Choteto mechatet achrav, right? Mechatet achrav b'chol makom shehu. you even have to, where the red arrow is and it goes back in and it goes into the meat, you have to go after it there as well. Okay. I'll just even point out for now, maybe if I point this out now, we don't have to pull up the slide later. I don't know, we'll have to see. But where that gold arrow is pointing to, so that's the, right, al akaf ayarich, what's on top of the thigh. So we're going to see later a shita that the Gid Hanasheh is actually only the part that's on top of the thigh. Only the part that's on top of the thigh. Al kaf hayarich, where the gold arrow is pointing to. Now, that's not the shita of Reb Meir and Reb Yehuda. Reb Meir and Reb Yehuda, as we saw, are talking about where the white arrow is pointing to. Not just what's on top of the thigh, but also what goes down the thigh. So Reb Yehuda says you just have to remove what the white arrow is pointing to. Reb Meir says you not just what the white arrow is pointing to, but even where the red arrow is pointing to, where it goes back into the meat. Okay. I think that now we have enough information to have another read of this Mishnah. So says the Mishnah, Hanotel Gid Hanasheh tzarich sheyitol es kulo. So that's like the sheet of Reb Meir, that somebody who's removing the Gid Hanasheh, it's not enough just to remove the part that goes down the thigh outside of the meat, but you even have to go into the meat wherever the Gid Hanasheh is. Reb Yehuda Omer, says Reb Yehuda, Kidei l'kayim bo mitzvahs netila, says Reb Yehuda, no, you just need to take out the part that's on the outside. I was saying in the introduction, to today's daf, like all of the layer, like this daf is a lot of layers that kind of step on each other in some ways. So I'm going to say this now. Basically, and we also saw this a little bit on Daf Tzadi Beis, Reb Yehuda and I mentioned it a little bit just now when we were looking at the photo. Reb Yehuda and Reb Meir agree on what Gid Hanasheh is mida oraisa, and that is what the white arrow was pointing to. The Gid Hanasheh that goes along the kaf hayarich, but doesn't go into the meat. Only what's outside of the kaf hayarich. Reb Meir and Reb Yehuda agree that is the Gid Hanasheh mida oraisa. Reb Meir, however, says that there's also an element of midirabanon, and that is the Gid Hanasheh that then goes back into the meat, which we were talking about the red arrow, where it goes back into the meat. Reb Meir says that that's also Gid Hanasheh midirabanon, and therefore it's also midirabanon. You also have to go after that as well. So what Reb Meir is saying in the Mishnah is, Anoto Gid Hanasheh tzarich shitol es kulo. You have to get all of it, not just the deoraisa that's going along the side of the kaf hayarich, but also the dirabanon that's going back into the meat of the leg. Whereas Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Kidei l'kayim bo mitzvahs netila. Whereas Rabbi Yehuda says, no, only the Gid Hanasheh midoraisa, that's it. You don't have to go after the part that goes into the meat. Givad, let me have a shluck of coffee. Givaldi, we've actually already covered a lot of ground just in understanding the first part of that Mishnah. We've covered a lot of ground to help us in the Gemara also. We've covered a lot just now. Ha'ochel mi-Gid Hanasheh, kazayis, if somebody eats a kazayis from the Gid Hanasheh, soifeg arboim, so is chayiv makis, 40 lashes. Ochlo ve'imbo kazayis, chayiv. Now, if a person eats the entirety of the Gid Hanasheh, now I pointed out as we were looking at the photo, and as we're going to see in the Gemara, that according to this shita, the Gid Hanasheh is just what's on top of the kaf hayarich, just what's on top of the thigh bone. It's not going all the way down the thigh bone, just what's on top of the thigh bone. And therefore, it could even be less than a kazayis. So if you eat the entirety of the Gid Hanasheh, and it's less than a kazayis, so even though it's less than a kazayis, you're still going to be chayav makis because you ate a whole thing. You ate the whole Gid Hanasheh, even though it's less than a kazayis. So ochel mi Gid Hanasheh, where am I? So ochlo, if you eat the whole Gid Hanasheh ve'embo kazayis, and it's less than a kazayis, chayiv. Ochal mizeh kazayis, right? There are two Gid Hanashehs in an animal, one on each leg. So if you eat a kazayis from the right leg and a kazayis from the left leg, soifeg shmoinim, you can be chayiv 80 lashes. Mistama, it's where you had separate warnings for each one, I'd imagine. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, says Rabbi Yehuda, Eino soifeg el arboim, you're only going to get 40 makis because there's only one Gid Hanasheh in the animal. According to Rabbi Yehuda, of course, there's only one Gid Hanasheh in the animal. Therefore, you're only going to get 40 makis. Says the Gemara, by Payuli, Havakoi Kame Dishmul V'Kamenaker Atma. Bar Payuli was removing the Gid Hanasheh from an animal. And Shmuel was there, and he was watching, he was observing. Havakagoyim le, and Bar Payuli was simply doing like Rabbi Yehuda's shita. Gomimo min hashofi. He was only removing, as we saw in the photo earlier, if you remember what the white arrow was pointing to, basically the Gid Hanasheh that was on the outside of the Kaf HaYarech. But he wasn't being mechatet achrov, he wasn't doing like Reb Meir, he wasn't going all the way into the meat as well. So again, have a kagoyim le, he was just removing what was on the outside of the meat. Amalei, Shmuel saw this, he says, no, chus beitvei. No, you got to go lower, you got to go into the meat like Reb Meir. Hashli lo chazisech sfisli isura. Wow, I'm really happy that I saw this, because if I didn't see this, I would have, you would have fed me. You would have fed me Isser, Gid Hanasheh. Irtas, and as you can imagine, by Payuli got very intimidated and nervous. Shmuel, the great Shmuel, is basically saying that you're a shmendrik. Nafal sakina miyodei, and the knife fell out of his hands. Amalei, Shmuel says, no, don't worry, relax. Lotir says, don't be nervous. Says Rashi, Amalei Lotir says, Lo be'ama aretz v'lo b'rasha ani choshdech. I don't think you're a Rasha. I don't think you're an Amma Aretz. Don't worry. The Orilach, Rabbi Yehuda Orilach. Whoever instructed you like Rabbi Yehuda's shita. That it's only gomimo min hashofi. You don't have to be mechatet acharov like Reb Meir. Whoever taught you like Rabbi Yehuda. Don't worry about it. Nish geferlich. Rav Sheshes says of Sheshes, which taka also makes sense. I think usually in machlekes Reb Meir and Reb Yehuda, we pass like Reb Yehuda normally. Rav Sheshes says of Sheshes, my dishakol by Payuli, the oraisa Reb Yehuda. That which by Payuli was removing, what was outside of the Kaf HaYarech, the oraisa Reb Yehuda is what Reb Yehuda considers the Gid Hanasheh mido oraisa. Michlal the Shire the Rabbanon the Reb Yehuda. Does that imply that, okay, and what he didn't remove, what Shmuel told him that he needs to remove, Rabbi Yehuda would say is also midir Rabbanon? Right? Meaning if Rav Sheshes is saying that what Bar Payuli removed is the Gid Hanasheh, according to Rabbi Yehuda, midir oraisa, does that imply that there are other elements that are also midir Rabbanon, the fishitas Rabbi Yehuda? Michlal the Shari the Rabbanon the Rabbi Yehuda? Ella. The Orile, Kiman Orile. Well, then whoever was instructing by Payuli just to remove what was outside of the Kaf HaYarech, why would he instruct him? Meaning, if according to Rabbi Yehuda, the part that's in the meat is also midir Rabbanon, well then he would have to remove that. So from the fact that by Payuli was only removing what was outside the Kaf HaYarech, and that's how he was instructed, well clearly it's going to have to be like somebody. So Amr of Sheshes says of Sheshes, my deshako by Payuli de oraisa li Reb Meir, uman deshari de Rabbanon li Reb Meir, di Rabbi Yehuda afilim de Rabbanon shari. No, says of Sheshes, according to Rabbi Yehuda, only what is outside of the Kaf HaYarech is Aser. That's it. Nothing else. That's also midoraisa. There's no derabbanans. That's it. Now, according to Reb Meir, what's on the outside of the Kaf HaYarech is also midoraisa, but what goes back into the meat, as we saw with that red arrow pointed at the bottom, where the Gid Hanasheh went back into the meat, that is also midorabanan. So again, let's read it again. So the first wide line, El Amr of Sheshes, my dishakal by Payuli, that which by Payuli removed, i.e. what was outside of the Kaf HaYarech, the oraisa le Reb Meir, Reb Meir would consider that to be the Kaf HaYarech, the Gid Hanasheh, mid oraisa, But Reb Meir says that when it goes into the meat, it's still asur, but midrabanan. Umay deshire, what Bar Payuli initially had left over, dirabanan Reb Meir. Reb Meir would say it's also midrabanan, and Shmuel had told him you need to remove that as well. The Reb Yehuda, in terms of Reb Yehuda, however, afil midrabanan shari. According to Reb Yehuda, even right, the Gid Hanasheh that goes into the meat would be mutter even midirabanan according to Reb Yehuda. All you have to remove is what Bar Payuli was removing initially, which is what's outside of the kaf hayarich. Now the Mishnah had said ha'ochel migid Hanasheh v'chulei. The Mishnah had said that if somebody, we were talking about how much you have to eat from the Gid Hanasheh. Omar Shmuel, says Shmuel, le'asur Torah elo she'ala kaf bilvad. So says Shmuel that midoraisa what's asur is only what's at the top of the shoulder. Right? As we saw earlier in the photo, you have the yarich, you have not shoulder, the thigh. You have the thigh, and the gida. Maybe let's just pull up the photo one more time. Okay, so here we have the photo. So where the gold arrow is pointing to, the top of the thigh bone, the Gid Hanasheh, as it passes over the top of the thigh bone, only al kaf hayarich, only what's on top of the thigh bone, where the gold arrow is pointing to, that is what is the Gid Hanasheh, that is what's asur. In terms of the white arrow and the red arrow, what's going down the side of the kaf hayarich, that is, as far as Shmuel saying, that is not the Gid Hanasheh midoraisa. The Gid Hanasheh is just what is above the thigh. So again, it's written inside Amar Shmuel, says Shmuel, le'asur Torah elo she'al akaf bilvad. That what the Torah says is also is only what's on top of the kaf hayarich. Shenemar, as the pasuk says, al kaf hayarich, what is on the kaf hayarich. Now, you might be wondering, did we just not have a story with Shmuel where Shmuel says not just the kaf hayarich, but also what goes down the side of the thigh, and also what goes into the meat itself? You have to be mechatit acharav. And here he's saying only what's asur is the kaf hayarich. So we'll have to answer that question. We're not going to answer it right now. We'll get back to it a little bit later. You might think maybe Shmuel says that midoraisa what's asur is just the part on top, but he says midorabanan you have to go all the way in. Tosfos doesn't agree with that, because if Shmuel is being lenient on the midoraisa, right? Meaning, we saw the shita of Rabbi Yehuda and Reb Meir that midoraisa, the Gid Hanasheh goes down the side of the leg. If Shmuel is being lenient to say that no, by the doraisa, it's less than that. It's only what's on top. He wouldn't then be more stringent when it comes to the abundance. If he's being lenient by the doraisa, he wouldn't all of a sudden be stringent by the abundance. So we saw a second ago that Shmuel said that you mamish have to mechatit acharav. He said to Bar Payuli, if I didn't see you, you would have fed me isser. So on the one hand, Shmuel is saying you have to be mechatit acharav into the meat. On the other hand, he's saying that midoraisa, it's actually only what's asur is what's directly above the top of the thigh. So that's a question. We'll get back to it later, but it's a question I do want to throw out, because it does seem that Shmuel sounds like he's being inconsistent. Okay, again, Amar Shmuel says Shmuel lo asur Torah ela she'al akaf bilvad. Shmuel says only what's asur is what's on top of the thigh. Shenemar supposed says al kaf hayarich, what's on the thigh. Amar Papa says Papa kitanoi. So Papa says, in terms of whether or not you agree with what Shmuel just said, is it just what's on top of the thigh or what goes down the thigh, like we saw as Shitas Reb Meir and Rabbi Yehuda? So it's a machlokes tanoim, says Papa. Achlo ve'embo kazayis. If a person eats the entirety of the Gid Hanasheh and it's less than a kazayis, chayav, you would be chayav according to the Tanakama. Rabbi Yehuda Omer achebo kazayis. You'd have to eat a kazayis. Now, I want to point out that there are three shitas here when it comes to Gid Hanasheh. You have Reb Yehuda, you have Reb Meir, and what we have here, the Tanakama of Rabbi Yehuda. Kilu, right now we're going to see machlokes Rabbi Yehuda and this Tanakama. So we'll refer to him as the Tanakama. So you have the shita of the Tanakama over here, the shita of Rabbi Yehuda, and the shita of Rabbi Meir. So again, Kitanai Ochlo Ve'embo Kazayis Chayiv. So the Tanakama says that if you eat the Gid Hanasheh and even if it's less than a kazayis, but you ate the whole Gid Hanasheh, you're chayiv. Rabbi Yehuda Omer ad sheyeh bo kazayis. Rabbi Yehuda says no. You're only chayiv for eating the Gid Hanasheh if it is a kazayis. If it is a kazayis, you have to eat a kazayis. My time to Rabbanan. Why do the Rabbanan say you're chayiv even if it's less than a kazayis? Biryai. Well, because you ate a whole thing, right? Like the Mishnah says in Masechta Makis, when it comes to an ant, if you eat an ant, you're chayiv for eating an ant, even though it's obviously a tiny amount, but you ate a whole thing. So when you eat a whole thing, it's important, it's significant, and you're chayiv for that. So here also, by the Gid Hanasheh, says the Chachamim, if you ate less than a kazayis, but it was the whole Gid Hanasheh, so you will be chayiv for that. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, you have to eat a kazayis. Rabbi Yehuda, achila ksiva bey. Rabbi Yehuda says, look, it says, alkein lo yochlu b'nei Yisrael Gid Hanasheh. Achila is b'kazayis. It has to be a kazayis, no less than that. V'rabbanon, hahi achila dichi isbe arba v'chamisha zeisim v'ochel chad kazayis michayv. What the rabbis say, well, what we learn from achila is that we learn from that what if you have a larger Gid Hanasheh? What if it's a very large Gid Hanasheh? Maybe it's 4 or 5 kazaysim large. So you don't have to eat the whole thing in order to be chayiv for eating Gid Hanasheh, even if you ate less than that. Even if you ate just an achila, even if you ate just a kazayis, you would already be chayiv. So again, according to the Chachamim, they say if you eat an entire Gid Hanasheh, you're chayiv even if it's less than a kazayis. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, it has to be a kazayis. Says achila, it has to be a kazayis. The Rabbanan say, no, what we learn out from achila is that you don't have to eat the entire Gid Hanasheh. If it's a large Gid Hanasheh, even if you just ate an achila's worth, even if you just ate a smaller amount, a kazayis amount, you would already be chayiv for that. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, that's learned out from somewhere else. Me'asher al kaf hayorech nafka. Because as we saw, according to Rabbi Yehuda, well, so let's even go weiter for a second. So we see that the Chachamim, the Shita of Tanakama here, they hold like Shmuel, whose opinion was just a few minutes ago, that what's osur from the Gid Hanasheh is just what's al kaf hayorech, only what's on top of the kaf hayorech. Whereas we know Reb Yehuda's Shita and Reb Meir's Shita as well, is that it's not just what's on top of the kaf hayorech, it goes down the leg as well. So what do we learn about? So then what are we learning from Asher al kaf hayorech? Why point out what's on top of the kaf hayorech if it's the whole leg? So says Rabbi Yehuda, what we learn from al kaf hayorech is even if you just ate part of the Gid Hanasheh, you don't have to eat the entirety of the Gid Hanasheh. Even if you just ate one part of it, for example, the part that's on top of the kaf hayorech, if you just ate that part, you would be chayiv. You don't have to eat the whole thing. As long as, if you're going to be chayiv for achila, of course, achila is b'kazayis. You'd have to eat a kazayis of it. But you're chayiv even if you eat a subsection. So the rabbis knew. So again, so where are we? Starting over. So the rabbis say if you eat the whole Gid Hanasheh, even if it's less than a kazayis, you're chayiv. Rabbi Yehuda says it says achila. Therefore, it has to be a kazayis. You're not chayiv if it's less than kazayis. It has to be a kazayis. The Rabbanan say what we learn out from achila is that even if it's a larger Gid Hanasheh, you don't have to eat the whole thing. You're chayiv even if you eat a smaller amount of it. Rabbi Yehuda says, well, that's learned from the fact that it says asher al kaf hayorech, even though the Gid Hanasheh is bigger than what's just on the kaf hayorech. It goes down the leg as well. But you're chayiv even if you just eat a smaller section. Where the rabbis say, no, what we learn out from al kaf hayorech is like Shmuel, that it's literally only the part that's on top of the yorech. Rabbi Yehuda, hayorech ksiv dechule yorech. Rabbi Yehuda learns out from hayorech, it says hayorech, that it's the whole yorech, even what goes down the side of the leg as well. V'rabbanon, hahu depashet isur bechule yorech lafuke chitzon delo. As we saw this shita the other day, that of course there's the Gid Hanasheh Pnimi and the Gid Hanasheh Chitzon, which we're not going to get into right now, but there's 2 Gid Hanashehs. The only one that's also midorais is the Gid Hanasheh Pnimi, and the Rabbanan say that it's the one that goes down the Yarech, and that is the Gid Hanasheh Pnimi. Ula olam shala kaf, but the only part that's also is the part that's on the Kaf ha Yarech. Okay, let's just finish up quickly. The high kaf miboyle limute of delays le kaf trey kaf ksive. 1 second, I thought kaf was to the exclusion of birds because birds don't have this kaf ayarich. We say, well, it says in the pasuk kaf twice. As the Gid Hanasheh kaf ayarich adayom ezeki noga but kaf yarich Yaakov. So it says Gid Hanasheh kaf twice, one to exclude birds and the other one to say that asher al kaf hayarich. Okay, so right, meaning al kaf hayarich on the top of the yarich. Let me chop a shlik of coffee. We'll do a quick review. So be'etzem we've seen here 3 shitas when it comes to the Gid Hanasheh. We saw the shita just now of the Chachamim, of the Tanakama over here, that they say that when it says al kaf hayarich, it means that literally the Gid Hanasheh is just the part that's on top of the thigh. We then saw the shita of Reb Meir, who says that no, hayarich means it goes all the way down the thigh as well. And in terms of al kaf hayarich, that teaches that even if you just ate a subsection of it, you'd be chayiv for that as well, so long as it's a kazais. And that's Reb Yehuda's shita. Reb Meir's shita is like Reb Yehuda, that it goes down the side of the leg, but he says then also additionally, that's just midoraisa, but midorabanan, it goes into the meat as well, and you have to remove that as well, because it's also midorabanan. So those are the 3 shitas, at least, as explained by Tosfos and Daf Tzadivav Mud Aleph, Dibra Mascha Michlal. Now, getting back to the question of Shmuel, on the one hand, Shmuel in the story, he was saying like Reb Meir, that you have to be mechatet acharei mamish into the meat. On the other hand, Shmuel is saying that the only part of the Gid Hanasheh that's also midorais is the part on the top of the thigh. So we'll say that you could say that he's just explaining be'etzim the shita of the Tanakama, but he doesn't necessarily hold that way. What he holds like is from the story. Right? Ma'aser Rav, we say, if you could prove something from a story, then that's a stronger proof. So if we see a story about Shmuel himself, who was saying to Bar Payula, you mamish need to go into the meat, clearly that's what he holds. And in terms of just what's on top of the kaf hayarich, he was just explaining the shita of the Tanakama, who says it's just what's on top of the yarich, but he doesn't actually hold that way himself. That was Daf Tzadi Vav, Daf 96 of Masechta Chullin. On Daf 96, we wrapped up the previous Mishnah discussing, right, and we discussed visually recognizing meat. Of course, yesterday we saw the shita of Rab, who said that if you take your eyes off of the meat, you can't eat it anymore. We have to assume that a bird came and swapped it out. We had said, however, if you could identify that meat, so then it's fine. And we said, and that even applies to if you don't have specific identifiers, but you say, look, I recognize this meat. This is the meat that was mine. That is enough. We then got to a new Mishnah, and we discussed defining the Gid Hanasheh. That was kind of like one of the main tasks that we had today, defining the Gid Hanasheh. According to the Chacham, according to the Tanakama, in that Brisa that was arguing against Rabbi Yehuda, the Gid Hanasheh is only what's on top of the thigh. Rabbi Yehuda said it also goes down the thigh, but not into the meat. Rabbi Meir says that even that he agrees with Rabbi Yehuda, but that midirabanan, it's also what does go into the meat. And finally, the amount to eat from the Gid Hanasheh, according to the Chachamim, if you eat a kazayas of a larger Gid Hanasheh, well, let's even start from the next part. Even less than a kazayas, if you eat the whole thing, right? If you're eating the whole Gid Hanasheh, even if it's less than a kazayas, you'd be chayiv for that since you ate an entire Gid Hanasheh. And if it's a larger Gid Hanasheh, then once you eat a kazayas of it, you're already chayiv. And Rabbi Yehuda says, it always has to be a kazayas. Once you eat a kazayas of the Gid Hanasheh, you are chayiv. And even if you eat the whole thing, but it's less than a kazayas, you're not chayiv. You have to eat at least a kazayas and then you're chayiv. Friends, that was the Daf Tzadi Vav of Masechta Chullin. I hope you enjoyed. Have a great day. Cheers.